Please note, rewards offered are subject to change or expire. To the author's knowledge, reward amounts are current and valid as of this episode's air date and may be subject to terms and conditions. Please confirm all reward details with the relevant case authority listed in the show notes. Welcome to Reward Offered. In this episode, we're going to be diving into the death of 17-year-old Angela Mealing in Cairns, Northern Queensland in the year 2000. The question in this case is, and always has been, was Angela's death due to suicide or homicide? We're going to take a look at the evidence that's available in the case, and you can decide for yourself which of the two you believe is more likely. There is a $250,000 reward offered for information which leads to the apprehension and conviction of the person or persons who may have been directly involved in assisting or causing the death of Angela Mealing. There is also an offer of indemnity from prosecution which may be recommended for any accomplice who comes forward with information first. If you have any information about what happened to Angela, please call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. You can remain entirely anonymous and still claim the reward. I'm your host Amanda. Let's dive in. If any of the details of this case cause you distress, please reach out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 in Australia or a relevant crisis support service in your local area. With minimal official information available publicly due to Angela's case still being open, and my request for a copy of the coronial findings being declined by the Coroner's Court due to an open finding, a resource I've utilised heavily in compiling Angela's story is a book written by author and investigative journalist Robert Reid. It's titled Under a Dark Moon: True Murders and Mysteries from North Queensland. He covers, I believe it's 14 different cases, all from the North Queensland region. Aside from being well written, it's clear that an incredible amount of research went into compiling these stories, and I definitely recommend the book. He includes the case of Natasha Ann Ryan, also known as the Girl in the Cupboard, as well as the case of Tom and Eileen Lonergan, the two scuba divers who were left behind on the Great Barrier Reef, who were the basis for the movie Open Water. But he also looks at some other interesting unsolved mysteries that I'd never even heard of, such as the missing luxury schooner, a type of sailing boat, not the beer vessel, called the Pantanella, that disappeared crew and all in 1988. I'll put the link to Reid's book on our socials, so check that out if you're interested and support an Aussie author. As I said, much of the case information you'll hear in this podcast is off the back of Robert's hard work, so full credit to him. All individuals are presumed innocent until found guilty in a court of law. Saturday, 1st of April, 2000. Angela Marie Mealing is 17. Her TAFE studies in office administration are reportedly going well, and she is working part-time at the Ichiban Ramen restaurant at the Cairns night markets. She isn't working tonight though. It's unknown precisely what time Angela leaves her home in the suburb of White Rock to catch a bus north into the city, but we do know she is headed to rendezvous with her friend Leonie Wood, known as Yabby. The girls have been friends for 4 years, and that evening are headed to what's been described as a housewarming party in the suburb of Maroubal. Leonie reports that Mealing, nicknamed Ruggs, was in her opinion acting entirely normal that night. At some point, Mealing leaves the gathering and heads to the nearby Balaclava Hotel, where she is said to have bought a cask of wine before returning to the party. At approximately 9 p.m, a guy Mealing has been seeing arrives at the house. Angela apparently hasn't known Ashley Berra that long and is reportedly yet to tell any of her family about him. At some stage after he arrives, Berra is said to have gotten into an argument with an ex of his who is also at the house and reportedly not happy about his new relationship with Mealing. It's said that Berra is asked to leave and agrees on the condition that Angela goes with him. The two leave to head to another house party nearby. After they depart, 3 women from the first party are said to have followed the pair to the footbridge which runs over Chinaman Creek. The 3 girls then set upon Mealing. She's punched repeatedly until such time that Berra apparently steps in to end the assault, leading Mealing to a traffic island on nearby Mulgrave Road. At this time, the couple apparently start arguing, with Angela justifiably not happy about Berra's ex and co having attacked her. Bera loses his temper and punches Mealing in the face. It's reported that this strike causes Angela to fall, resulting in cuts to both her mouth and her head from the traffic island's concrete edge and the bitumen. What's curious to me here is that at least one of Mealing's head injuries is reported to be on the top of her head. But if you strike your head in a fall, you'd expect the damage to be to the front, back, or sides of your head, not often in a position you would describe as being on the top. An injury to the top of the head usually indicates being struck with something, but there's nothing in the story we have that could explain that. Considering the severity of her head injuries is important in order to establish how likely it is that she sustained any meaningful head injury in the assaults, but we'll come back to her injuries shortly. 11:30 p.m. Bera and Mealing are walking south along Mulgrave Road. In the midst of their journey, they by chance come across the 21st birthday celebrations of an old schoolmate of Bera's. David Roberts recognises Bera as the pair walking by the Solomon Carpets business where the party is being held. Roberts apparently addresses the elephant in the room immediately, asking Bera about the injuries clearly visible on Mealing. Reportedly, Bera openly admits to Roberts that he had punched Mealing earlier, though declines to comment when queried about blood that is reportedly evident on his shirt. We don't have any word on the amount of blood that's being referenced here, though. A group of female partygoers bring Mealing inside. One of these girls, Deborah Laurie, takes stock of her visible injuries. Puffy lips, a deep cut again reported as being on the top of her head, as well as blood on her face, arms, and clothing. Considering the injuries we know Mealing has is important, because while her eyes were reportedly focused and she didn't appear to be drunk, her voice was described as being slurry. How badly had the three girls beaten Mealing about the head? How hard had Bera punched her in the face? And how hard did her head strike the Rhode Island? Is what we have an accurate depiction of the extent of both assaults? And most importantly, what was the cumulative effect of all of these head blows? As already mentioned, none of the methods of assault, nor mechanisms of injury that we've spoken of so far, explain why Angela might have a deep cut described as being on top of her head. Any or all of these injuries we know to have occurred that night, i.e. fist strikes to the head, the punch to the face, and the contact with the pavement, could have caused a concussion for Angela. The description of Mealing having slurry speech, despite reportedly not showing other signs of intoxication, could indicate that she was exhibiting symptoms of what is known as dysarthria. Dysarthria is a motor speech disorder, whereby damage to the nervous system causes weakness within the muscles of the face, which in turn results in speech difficulties. It arises when an individual suffers a traumatic brain injury, a TBI, or a serious facial trauma with associated nerve damage. This weakens the muscles, or completely paralyzes them, resulting in the person having abnormal speech. It's important to note, though, that the person isn't necessarily mentally impaired at all. They can know exactly what they want to say, yet struggle to say it. If Angela did have dysarthria, there's every chance she was fully aware of what she sounded like, but she would have had no idea why it was happening. There is various areas of the brain which, when damaged, can result in slotted speech. It often occurs within the cerebellum, which affects your coordination, but can also occur within the motor cortex, which affects voluntary muscle movement, the basal ganglia, which affects involuntary muscle movement, and the brain stem itself, which affects the muscles used in breathing and those that help us make sounds. It's estimated anywhere between 10 to 60% of TBI survivors experience dysarthria. There are other common symptoms that may or may not accompany this slurred speech. These include slow speech, a quiet volume, mumbling, breathiness, and/or monotone speech or a lack of expressiveness. It's the distinction from the women that interact with Angela at the birthday party, reportedly claiming that her eyes were focused and that she didn't appear drunk to them, that makes me think the slurring could be from brain trauma, more so than her consumption of alcohol that night. Despite her condition, Mealing reportedly refuses offers to call the police or take her to hospital. The latter will prove important when considering events which occur later that night. Mealing indicates she doesn't have any money and that she doesn't want her mum seeing her in that state. She does, however, supposedly silently mouth, "Get me away from him," to some of the other partygoers, seemingly in reference to Bera. In an attempt to do just that, they apparently try and sneak Angela over the back fence of the property. It's important to take a mental note here that she was physically incapable of climbing over this back fence, which was reportedly approximately 2 meters in height. Bank that. After this is unsuccessful, they instead take her back through the showroom and out the front door, a route which falls out of eyeshot of bearer. Deborah Laurie tells Mealing to make a run for it, make a reverse charge call from a payphone, and to arrange for someone to come and pick her up. It's reported that Mealing sets off from the party at about 12:20 a.m., walking south on Mulgrave Road, heading in the direction of her home. About 30 minutes later, Bearer notices she's gone, and surveillance footage reportedly shows him set off in his search for her, he too heading south, but for apparently only a short period of time before turning and heading back north in the direction of town. I've seen no mention of his alibi beyond this point in time when he is seen moving in the opposite direction Angela was last known to be travelling. But if she had left 30 minutes earlier, and he didn't know it had been that long, it's entirely feasible and reasonable that when he realises he can't see her along the main road ahead, he just gives up, and that's why he turns around. It doesn't take long for Angela's mum Jackie to become worried. Angela hadn't left a note or told anyone where she was headed on Saturday night. So come the next morning, when Jackie finds out about the previous night's party and the assaults on her daughter, she immediately calls police. Subsequent media coverage resulted in a bus driver coming forward who thought he'd seen Mealing that Saturday night at about 11 p.m. as the last passenger to get off his bus. But apparently police claim he had simply recognised her from previous occasions on the bus and was mistaken. The only weird thing about this is that the bus driver supposedly claimed that when he saw her, she had a cut lip and bruises on her face. If police are correct and the driver did indeed see her on a different night, does that mean Angela was taking late-night bus trips on at least 2 different occasions with visible injuries to her face? In any case, Queensland Police and the State Emergency Service volunteers found exactly 0 trace of the 17-year-old in their search of the area around Angela's home suburb of White Rock. Initially, police believed Deborah Laurie and co. from the 21st party to be the last to have seen Mealing before she disappeared. But just days later, police are caught off guard when one of their own, a second-year still probationary constable in the Queensland Police Force, comes forward with a revelation. Adrian Diemel advises that he is in fact likely the last person to have seen Angela that night, revealing that he had picked her up in the early hours and given her a lift to the suburb of Gordonvale. Diemel, who Reid notes as being a member of a prominent North Queensland Aboriginal family, had reportedly only recently come back from leave and had in fact taken part in searches for Angela upon his return, obviously failing to reveal his link to the case before doing so. Reid writes in his book that this confession by Diemel came as a complete shock to investigators, who had apparently been struggling to unearth any leads as to Mealing's movements and whereabouts after leaving the party. Diemel's story of that night would later change, but this is what his initial timeline looked like. Friday night, March 31, 2000. Diemel has an argument with his wife, apparently over marital issues, and leaves the family home in Maroubal. I've also been told that he'd already moved out of the family home, so he may have just been visiting that location. He claims he spent that night sleeping in his car parked at the Pier Marketplace car park, which is about a 15-minute drive from the family home. On Saturday, he says he checked into the Adobe Motel on Sheridan Street. An odd side note here, Reid writes that Diemel checked in under an assumed name, apparently as he didn't want his wife to discover his whereabouts, which is weird to me, but okay. Diemel, who was 39 at the time, tells police that he was driving south down Mulgrave Road towards Edmonton at around 2:15 a.m. Sunday morning, when he sees Mealing, who appears to be in trouble, dishevelled and staggering along the road outside the Cairns Golf Club. Let's pause for a moment and gather our bearings. The distance from the birthday party south to Angela's home suburb of White Rock is about 7 kilometres. This may equate to a quick 10-minute drive, but for Angela, who is headed home on foot, it's an estimated 1.5-hour walk according to Google Maps. But don't forget, she's also very possibly sustained a head injury, and while no one seems to indicate seeing her having any trouble walking at the 21st, Diemel himself claims she is stumbling when he sees her, which may or may not be true, but it is at least possible that the symptoms from a head injury could have become exacerbated, and that another area of the brain affecting her balance and/or coordination and muscle control has also been impacted by this point. If we believe Diemel, for the moment, that he sees her at around 2:15 a.m, this is approximately 2 hours since she left the party. The Cairns Golf Club, where he claims they first crossed paths, is about a 1 hour, 10-minute walk from the 21st. But according to Diemel's timeline, it's around 2 hours after Angela left the party that he sees her at that spot. Could her stumbling, if she's in fact doing so, explain a delay of 50 minutes in her journey? Sure, she also could have stopped along the way at least once. The average person's walking pace is said to be about 5 kilometres an hour. Mealing is last seen leaving Solomon's at what is reported to be 12:20 a.m. Even if we halve that pace to allow for stumbling, if she was constantly moving, she would have already walked past the golf club by the 2:15 a.m. timestamp Diemel claims he sees her. So if we again assume for the moment that Diemel is telling the truth, where has Angela been since 12:20 a.m.? Just sitting on the side of Mulgrave Road? It's possible. It has been a shit night for Mealing so far. But there's no reports of anyone else having seen Mealing on Mulgrave Road, or anywhere else for that matter, in that given time window. Depending on the existence and severity of a TBI, if she is experiencing dysarthria, it often doesn't just go away. It can sometimes require significant speech therapy to recover, depending on the location and severity of the damage to the brain. So her life may still have been altered by that night, even if she had made it home and we weren't talking about her case today. Diemel's claim was that he had stopped his car under a streetlight in front of Angela, and after speaking briefly, she had gotten into his car. After picking her up, this off-duty officer does not take this young woman, technically a child, who he describes as disorientated and stumbling, with blood on her body and clothes, with evident injuries, to a police station to file a report. Nor does he take her to the hospital, a mere 15 minutes away, to seek medical attention. Even if her wounds were superficial, based on witness descriptions of Mealing's visual state, including Diemel's, it would be difficult to not draw a conclusion that there is a good chance this young lady may have sustained a head injury, which almost certainly should have been evaluated. Diemel claims that after she initially discusses her injuries with him, that he does turn the car around to head back into town towards the hospital, except he says that when they are less than 1 kilometre from healthcare, keeping in mind that the hospital is roughly 8.6 kilometres from where he says he picked her up, so he's basically driven her the whole way there if that's true, that Mealing refuses treatment and asks instead to be dropped at the suburb of Gordonvale, at which time he says he turns around again to begin the 30-minute drive south. Even if Diemel's claims are accurate that Mealing refused to go to the hospital, as she did reportedly express to others earlier in the night, is it reasonable or believable that a police officer, on duty or not, should or would allow a minor who's been drinking and has likely experienced considerable head trauma given the physical indications he reports as having seen, and the information she herself has supplied to him about having been assaulted, make the call as to whether she should be seen by a doctor? Surely there's a duty of care here. Plus, this is Australia. It wouldn't have cost a cent for Angela to be evaluated and treated, nor would they have had to wait very long for her to be seen, if at all, if a triage nurse was concerned about her symptoms and a head injury. But back to Diemel's story. He claims that once in his vehicle, Mealing had told him about her boyfriend assaulting her, and that under the car's interior light, he too could see the cut on the top of her head. So, just a quick recap. This off-duty police officer says he picks up a child on the side of the road after 2 a.m, who tells him she's been assaulted, who has visible injuries, is bleeding and reportedly by his own account is stumbling and disorientated when he first sees her, doesn't take her to a police station, doesn't take her to a hospital, and doesn't take her home. This father of two claims the last time he sees 17-year-old Angela Mealing was when he dropped her off in the darkness on Riverstone Road, approximately 150 metres from the service station located on the corner of Riverstone Road and the Bruce Highway. According to Diemel, Angela has instructed him to drop her past the service station so that she could walk to a friend's house. Except reports say that no one was ever able to identify anyone Angela knew down that road. Another thing that stood out to me is the fact that outside of the Cairns Golf Club, to Angela's home suburb of White Rock, is about a 30-minute walk, but a 2-minute drive. Yet this young girl, who was reported as having repeatedly said, "I just want to go home," while at the 21st, according to Diemel, after the back and forth regarding the hospital, now has him bypass her home and continue to drive her an extra 15 minutes south to Gordonvale. But then, his story changes. On Friday, April 7, in an interview with police accompanied by a solicitor, I'm going to go with Bibi Melik, he reportedly now claims that on the Saturday morning, he had cancelled a boat hire booking that he'd lined up for a fishing trip that afternoon. Diemel is apparently reimbursed $300 and uses that to check into the Adobe Motel. He goes to his room, room 15, and falls asleep on top of the covers. At around 3:30 that afternoon, so Saturday afternoon, Diemel says he wakes up and goes to the nearby freshwater hotel for a sandwich and a 6-pack of beer. He then reports returning to the hotel, downing a couple of the beers, and then driving to Edmonton to have more beers with his brother. Diemel says he leaves at about 10:30 p.m, when he then drives to his cousin's house at Warree and they watch a rugby league game. Not yet ready to call it a night, Diemel claims he drove into the city where he parked in Lake Street in order to visit the My Bar nightclub. Not long later, he moves on down Spence Street to the Underdog Hotel and then the Sports Bar Saloon. He says that when he doesn't see anyone he knows, he drives back to the Pier Marketplace, where he reckons he just sits in the car park for another 30 to 45 minutes, bringing the time to around 1:45, 2 a.m. There's no indication how Diemel then comes to be driving past the Cairns Golf Club to see Mealing at 2:15 a.m. per his claims. The Cairns Golf Club is about a 12-minute drive from the pier though, so that part of the timeline is at least plausible. There's bigger problems with his timeline though. According to Robert Reed's book, for all the night spots Diemel claims to have visited in town, the security cameras at the Sports Bar Saloon don't capture any vision of him on the premises in the time window he claims to have been there. Similarly, the cameras at the top of the escalator leading up to My Bar apparently show no evidence of Diemel having attended the venue that night, anomalies he could offer no explanation for. His absence on the nightclub security cameras wasn't even the biggest red flag in Diemel's story of that night's events though. Remember how he claims he turned off the Bruce Highway into Riverstone Road and dropped Angela off just past the servo? Well, that servo had security cameras too. And Diemel's vehicle, a red Toyota Lexus, never turned onto Riverstone Road. It does, however, drive south past the service station, continuing along the Bruce Highway. Now, I can't find anything publicly about what time Diemel's car was seen passing the servo, or what time it passes back in the opposite direction, but obviously that is a crucial window of time for us. I'll put a photo of a red Toyota Lexus on our socials. Now you may rightly be wondering how on earth Diemel didn't realise that the girl he spent hours with, by his account on Saturday night, was the same girl who he participated in official searches for in the following days. Well, according to him, he hadn't made a connection until a description of her clothing pricked his memory. Although you would think that while conducting searches for Angela, that those participating would have been given a description of her outfit at that time, so why nothing pricked for him at that point seems a bit strange. He would also have been familiar with her name, but we'll come back to that. The investigation designated Operation Hawthorn, with Chief Detective Inspector Graham Rinders from the Brisbane Homicide Squad heading a team of detectives, worked to try and unearth Angela's whereabouts. Forensic testing of Diemel's car and the hotel room he had been staying in found nothing. Absolutely zero trace of Mealing ever having been in Diemel's car. Things didn't look good from the get-go though, with police quite quickly suspecting foul play, due to a bank check which had been deposited into Angela's account having gone untouched. Diemel was placed on recreational leave as the investigation continued and searches were undertaken around the Goodenvale area, given that's where Diemel said he had last left Mealing. There was reportedly bouts of wet weather for periods throughout the search, which would not only hinder the search efforts, but would inevitably be compromising any physical evidence. Police utilised a mannequin dressed in clothing similar to what Angela was wearing Saturday night and placed it on Mulgrave Road near where she was last seen, hoping to prompt tips from passing motorists. April 18 sees Diemel interviewed by Queensland Police for a third time, and the following day a Brisbane newspaper runs an article revealing that they had uncovered court documents showing Diemel had been convicted twice for breaches of a domestic violence order just the year prior in 1999. Allegations of him having placed a knife to a woman's throat had resulted in an assault causing bodily harm charge, but the charge was reportedly dismissed when the complainant failed to appear for a court hearing. The mind boggles as to how this man was allowed to remain on the force in spite of those charges and convictions, although to be fair, I doubt that would be the case today, so at least we're hopefully making some progress on that front. If you thought the behaviour of an off-duty police officer couldn't be more irresponsible, hold on to your scuba gear, because it's about to become outright fucking outrageous. Reportedly, In Diemel's next version of events, after getting into his vehicle, he claims that Mealing then tells him she wants a drink. So this police officer drives the bloody and battered miner in his vehicle to the rear of a city motel that was apparently known to sell after hours. He purchases a 6-pack of beer and drives the two of them to what is described as a quiet spot in Upwood Street. By his account, both of them consume half a beer, and at this point, Diemel claims that because he doesn't want Mealing, quote, wandering around on her own, he drives her to the Gordonvale location near the servo, yet, contradictorily to his just stated concerns, then proceeds to leave the vulnerable, bleeding, battered, likely tipsy child the same way he found her, alone on the side of the road, at a location police say cameras confirm he in fact did not. Unsurprisingly, the Diemel clock is off by about 2 hours. Another discrepancy he couldn't account for. While he claimed all of this occurred around 3 a.m, according to Reed's book, witnesses and cameras have him purchasing that 6-pack of beer at 1:04 a.m, shortly before stopping off at a nearby servo to purchase cigarettes. What I haven't seen any indication of is whether there is any definitive evidence in this footage that Mealing is with him at this time. It would also be incredibly useful to know what she's wearing at this point in the timeline, and you'll understand why a little later. A little over a month after she disappeared, the 12th of May 2000, marked what would have been Angela's 18th birthday. Her mum had recently won a competition with an incredible prize of tickets and accommodation for the Olympic Games being held in Sydney that year. The prize was reportedly valued at $11,000, and Jackie had planned to surprise Angela with the package to celebrate her milestone birthday. Her older brother Aaron had planned to accompany her on the once-in-a-lifetime trip. Angela would never get the opportunity, though. Sunday, the 14th of May. While passing through on their way to New South Wales, a man and his son, hoping to snag some bait for fishing, stopped off at a bridge crossing Bahana Creek on the Bruce Highway south of Gordonvale. Instead, they found a wallet and a foul odour. They notified police. Before too long, human remains are discovered, a skull and a few scattered bones. Also located at the scene was a shirt and a backpack, the latter containing a number of personal items, including a hairbrush. After 6 weeks of searching, Angela was no longer missing. Because of the vivid picture it paints, I'll use Reed's exact words here. He writes, "Her remains were found just 5 metres from a track that skirts the edge of a cane field and 50 metres upstream from the bridge. They were scattered in a peaceful sun-dappled glen at the base of majestic hardwood trees, where birdsong can be heard over the muffled sound of traffic passing on the bridge." I'll include some images on our socials from the Google Street views upstream from the bridge, satellite images of the area, and some shots of the area along the creek taken by photographer David Taylor. A big thank you to David for permission to use his photos, and also to the owners of the property, Alex and Bonnie, for allowing me to show photos of their land. These pictures really show just how beautiful the area is, seemingly hidden away from the major arterial highway which passes nearby. The creek's Aboriginal name is Tringalburra. Please someone let me know if I'm mispronouncing that, meaning sparkling water, and when you see David's photos, you'll understand why. While not initially shared publicly, it was later revealed that a tree, described as being little more than a sapling, had sported a noose described as being fashioned from a synthetic clothesline-style rope. This rope had been found above Angela's remains. Further leading to a suggestion of suicide was a note. Reed describes the words being etched across 2 different trees and having read, "I'm sorry, Mum, be strong, not your fault, Ange," accompanied by a heart. Unbelievably, police later admitted to having completely missed the existence of the rope on the first day on scene. It was only on the second day that a police photographer taking images of the scene looked up and noticed the noose overhead. As Lincoln Rhymes says, crime scenes are 3-dimensional: floors, walls, and ceilings. The rope is described as having been in poor condition and frayed, with a vine having begun intertwining with it, at least the latter suggesting that it had been in situ for a period of time. I literally found my index finger and thumb pursed to the inner corners of my eyes after reading the following in Reed's book. Reportedly, at a later point in time, QPS had planned to stage a reenactment of a suicide attempt at the location, but apparently, while they remembered to bring an officer of similar size and weight to Mealing, forgot to bring a rope. But luckily for them, They were fortunate enough to locate an adequate-sized piece, described as being just a few metres away, in, quote, a matter of minutes. Look, on the overall, I'm pro-police, and I don't like painting them in any poorer light than is ever deserved. They do an incredibly difficult job, often thanklessly. They put their lives on the line and give up time with their families, particularly detectives. But I'm also not going to brush over what we can all see are glaring issues here. If Reed's account is accurate, they've missed a blatant death device located at what they would likely assume is the primary crime scene. They didn't remember to bring a rope to their own reenactment of a hanging. And they obviously didn't scour the immediate area surrounding the crime scene very well if they can conveniently locate another length of rope a mere few metres away from where Angela's body was found. These bungles would be problematic in the best of situations. But what further complicates this situation is that the last person to have been known to be with a young woman who was later found deceased is one of their own officers. Now, I'm not suggesting QPS have done anything untoward in this investigation. I've seen nothing to explicitly evidence that. But guys, if you want to aid yourselves in avoiding the appearance and accusations of impropriety, these kinds of oversights are only ever going to complicate things for you unnecessarily. And that, sadly and inevitably, only takes attention away from the one thing that should be the sole focus of everyone's attention: finding out the truth about what happened to your victim. I would be interested to know the ins and outs of this experiment and how legitimate it was, because unfortunately, I just don't have overwhelming confidence in their findings based on the issues we've already noted. But in any case, their conclusions were that it would be, quote, relatively easy, end quote, for Angela to have stood on a branch and fashioned the noose higher in the tree, yet, quote, very difficult, if not impossible, end quote, to manoeuvre a limp body up the tree and then place it into a noose. In their defence, QPS did remain open to the idea that the crime scene may have been staged and an elaborate cover-up, despite physical evidence on hand that at face value suggested suicide. There was reportedly a clump of hair and traces of flesh found on the noose. So we know in the very least that Angela is forensically linked to the rope. There was, however, issues with the idea that Mealing had ended her own life. If not driven to that location, Mealing could only arrive there by walking along a major highway thoroughfare, presumably for kilometres. How did she manage that without being seen by any motorists, regardless of the time of night? Especially given that on the same night Angela went missing, 2 Gordon Vale police officers, Officers Johnson and Williams, were patrolling that same stretch of Bruce Highway at 1:45 a.m. and stopped and spoke to a barefooted woman with shoulder-length curly hair who said she'd been at a party in Gordon Vale and was now walking home to Innisfail. Officer Williams reported that while the woman evidently didn't want to talk to police, she had no evident facial injuries and didn't appear agitated. There seems to be no suggestion that this may have been Angela, but it is evidence that people walking along the Bruce Highway, even at 1:45 a.m, are usually spotted by someone. And the question still remains: how does a solid-built young woman, unable to climb over a 2-metre fence out the back of Solomon's Carpets, manage to climb up what is described as a flexible sapling to first fashion a noose and then end her life with it? Reed describes the small tree as being, quote, barely 75 centimetres in diameter, but I suspect that's a typo because 75 centimetres in diameter is actually a substantial tree, so I think he means 75 millimetres or 7.5 centimetres. Given there is far sturdier trees nearby, regardless of whether we are considering the scene as a suicide or a homicide, the question that lingers is why this tree? While I can hypothesize possibilities if it's a staged scene, I struggle to find any that seem to make sense under the notion of a suicide. The other thing out of place is, remember the father and son who prompt the search that finds Angela? The item they find is a wallet, which based on description seems to have been closer to the road than where her remains were. Why wouldn't it be with her and the rest of her belongings? Could it suggest a struggle? Due to the level of decomposition, the autopsy was unable to find a cause of death, but there was reportedly no obvious signs of trauma to the jaw, skull, or any of the other recovered bones. Wording seems to imply that not all of Angela's remains were recovered though, so I'm curious which ones were, and how police account for any that are in fact missing, in their theory. The only clothing I can find ever mentioned as having been found at the scene is 2 shirts and a sports bra that are mentioned in Reed's book, and we'll discuss the oddities with those items shortly. But where's the rest of Angela's outfit? Police said household rubbish was found around the immediate crime scene, and that Milling may have found the rope by chance. I wonder if it's the case, as odd as I would find it, that all that rubbish wasn't collected as part of the investigation, and if that's why the other segment of rope was there to be conveniently found and utilised in their reenactment, the fact that the second piece wasn't already in evidence is difficult to understand. No doubt you've wondered to yourself, what did she use to scribe the alleged suicide message into the tree? Well, her family said that she didn't have a knife, and no knife was found at the scene. An item described as a metal strip was found under Mealing's backpack, but testing reportedly ruled that out as a possible tool, and police were said to have no explanation for the presence of the strip, nor what it actually was. Also inexplicable is the sudden appearance of a sports bra and a massage-type sandal, both belonging to the teenager, which appeared at the crime scene after it had already been searched by police multiple times already. Both items were found by Angela's aunt and other family members as they visited the location to place a cross and lay flowers. The top was found blatantly hanging in a tree, while the sandal was inside the hollow cavity of a tree root. Police insisted there was zero chance the items had been present during their searches and must have been placed there after the fact by someone unknown. No one has been able to explain who placed the items there, when they did so, or how they came to be in possession of the items to begin with. The sports bra is said to have been worn by Angela on the night she went missing, and police also found a blood-stained white Nike t-shirt in her backpack that matched the description of the top several witnesses believed she had been wearing that Saturday night. However, Mealing's remains were reportedly found in a 3-buttoned, sky blue, collarless shirt that reportedly none of her family or friends were able to identify, and Angela's mother seemed certain it hadn't belonged to her daughter. The only suggestions from police were that either someone at the birthday party had given it to her, or she had somehow acquired it after she left that location. I find it difficult to believe that it wasn't possible to locate every person who'd been present at the birthday party and conclusively confirm if anyone there had in fact supplied her with the shirt. If we could confirm no one there gave her the t-shirt, and we know she is with Demel in his car afterwards, I would be interested if those people known to Demel were shown an image of the shirt to see if any of them recognised it. It wasn't until 2 days after the remains were found that Demel was suspended, with full pay, for being untruthful to police during their investigation. Despite the bizarre circumstances of his interaction with Angela on the night in question, and being the last person known to be with her, police reportedly insisted that Demel was, quote, definitely not, end quote, a suspect. I mean, this has to have been a strategy, right? Otherwise, I have to be missing something blatantly obvious here. I understand not coming out and declaring him a suspect for fear of him claiming up, but to say that he is definitely not a suspect given all the circumstantial evidence you have around him, while simultaneously asking the public for information. Look, while not the same thing to a layperson, to the public, you've as good as just said that you've cleared him, and in doing so possibly shut down an inflow of leads. And again, not helping yourselves with the optics of the situation, then or for anyone looking back down the track in hindsight. Like me. Something else stood out amidst what appear to be, at least to me, innumerable issues with the suicide theory. How did she see what she was doing? Take a look at the photos of the area. The satellite images, the street view images, David's photographs. Along the creek is heavily wooded. It would have been incredibly dark, if not close to pitch black at night. It's 2000. She doesn't have an iPhone with a torch. Am I expected to believe that a girl who I struggle comprehending would even know how to tie a proper noose? Because let's face it, a noose is a very particular knot that tightens on itself. This is not a granny knot. Angela's own mother at a later coronial inquest would say that Angela had no knowledge of ropes, could barely tie her own shoelaces, and was not nearly athletic enough to pull up her own body weight, as evidenced in her inability to climb over the back fence at the birthday party to escape bearer. This same girl climbs a tree and ties a noose in the pitch black on the edge of a creek bank? Okay, maybe. And admittedly, until seeing a photo of the message on the tree, this next point holds less weight. But have you tried scratching anything into a tree lately? It's difficult and time-consuming. I'd be interested to know just how legible this message is. Because carving a suicide note into a tree, be it without any evident tool, is one thing. But doing so in a manner that would still be legible, in the pitch black, is difficult for me to comprehend. I would assume that given surrounding trees were cut and removed to be analysed, that the section of trees with the carving were also removed and have been kept in evidence. I would also suggest that when carving a note into a tree, one would usually make contact with the tree with their non-dominant hand to stabilise themselves as they carve. So there's a chance that there could be genetic material left on the trunk of the tree, near to where the carving was made by the person who left the message. It would be interesting to know if that was ever considered and tested for. Whenever I start researching a case, I go into it as best I can, with zero presumptions. I've seen firsthand how the public forward-facing presentation of a case can be entirely inaccurate, and I believe wholeheartedly that no one listening to an episodic podcast on a case should be drawing any conclusions about the guilt of an individual in their mind. Very few people on any case will ever have the kind of access that you need to the inner circle of information to be able to reasonably start drawing any kind of conclusion in their mind, and none of you, nor I, are anywhere near close enough to Angela's case to be doing that. Public speculation about how suspicious someone's actions or claims seem doesn't help move the needle in getting justice for Angela. It requires people with information to speak up. If you know anything about what happened to Angela, please call Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000. That's a wrap on part 1 of our dive into Angela's case. Part 2 should be up in your feed so you can jump straight over. We'll take a look at how likely it was that Angela committed suicide and talk about staged crime scenes before we discuss elements of the coronial inquest into her death and see just how much weight suicide and murder each hold based on the sum evidence we have. Socials are reward_offered. See you for part 2. Thanks for listening.